that there is a slight distortion in her replies to my questions due to the fact that we are dealing with very long, ultra-long distance lines between California and Italy, and it just crept in. We have done everything we can here, our sound man, to reduce this sound, and I just want to say that we're aware of it, and we're sorry that it's there, but please listen anyway, because this is truly one extraordinary dreamland. Plus, for you subscribers, I am going to be doing something that I've been trying to do for a long time. There is a lot of my experience. After all, I was involved with the visitors for 11 years, and I've written about maybe 5% of it. There is a lot that is beginning to come back to me in a strange way. I read a lot of your emails, especially the ones that are describing experiences, and there seem to be sparking memories in me that I haven't really ever addressed before. But when I remember them, they seem perfectly clear, but I don't remember them on a day-to-day basis. And I've written them down in emails to some of you, sending them back and describing my own experiences. And I'm going to be talking about these experiences for subscribers. These are things I've never spoken about before. And now let's go on to Whitley Strieber and Paola Harris. Well, there have been some exciting developments in the UFO world in the past few days in Milan, and a remarkable sighting. We have Paola Harris on the line from Italy. Paola started her work in the UFO field by working for J. Allen Hynek, no less, and has been a reporter and journalist in this field ever since. She has a great website, paolaharris.it for Italy. Paola is in Italy. That's paolaharris.it. She has a book out on her website, and which is available from the unknowncountry.com store and also through Amazon, Connecting the Dots. It is interviews with the top people in the field, an exploration of just what it's all about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Also, later, we're going to be talking about Paola's work with Charles Hall. As you know, Charles Hall has been of great interest to everyone on Dreamland because we have interviewed him, and we recently had that remarkable subscriber interview with Glynis Mackay from Australia, who, without knowing anything about Charles Hall, turned out to have been involved for years with what seemed to be the same being. So very exciting stuff ahead. Now, Paola, let's start with a sort of an overview of what's going on in Europe, because I know there's been a flotilla over Spain, like appeared over Mexico, and now what I consider possibly, and you also have said, one of the potentially very important event, 6 hours of UFOs hanging over Milan.
Yeah, this is a really big story in that we haven't had a sighting like this in a long time, and it was on Saturday night, which was the 6th of February, and it was from 11 o'clock at night until 5 in the morning, and first they were 5 points of light, and then they came closer, and they were in a horizontal position. And what happened is that the people in that area called the police right away. They called the fire department. They called the airport, which was the closest. It's Linate Airport, to ask what was happening because they'd never seen a phenomenon like this. Now, those 5 lights change colors and shapes. So they were 5 lights in a horizontal position changing colors and shapes. And the irony is that the press and the media covers this a lot more openly in Europe, Whitley. The press came, and the pictures that I sent you of these lights and the changing shapes were taken by a kind of the on-site photographer. He's like our Associated Press photographer. So here is the press photographing UFOs. They're not calling them that. They're just calling them unusual lights. Here is the airport saying that they're not on the radar, so they're not going to scramble anything that's not on the radar. They're not going to scramble any jets. And here are a set of lights everybody's watching for a long period of time. It was an incredible phenomenon reported by 3 newspapers and 2 television channels.
that statement, not on the radar, is important because, of course, the debunkers were saying they were weather balloons. Weather balloons are coded so that they will show up on radar.
Yeah, the debunkers are saying they're weather balloons, but they don't change shapes, and also weather balloons have to be lit from the sun or some light source in order to reflect. I mean, everybody knows they don't reflect at night.
These weren't reflecting dully; they were actually shining, weren't they?
They were shining and moving and changing colors. In fact, the testimony that we have, and we'll have his word-for-word testimony next week, talks about this particular young man talks about they're changing color from red to green to orange, and I don't think weather balloons do that.
No, they're not lately. We have that set of photographs that you sent us up on our website. So, folks, if you go to unknowncountry.com, just look in the. I guess it'll probably be archived now, or it may be up on the main page. I don't know. But you can look at the story we ran about this, and we ran it immediately because I felt it was a very important sighting. Paola, can you tell us, has there been anything further? Is this sort of it?
No, because all the agencies, everybody is curious, and we're sure somebody did some video footage, and it was there long enough. We want to get the video footage. So a lot of the investigators are going to Milan to see if we can find video footage of this phenomenon. And then a researcher like me, Whitley, is trying to figure it out because it reminds me a lot of the Phoenix Lights. And I'm doing some stories on the Phoenix Lights and have some original film footage from this summer. And those things appear over South Mountain also. And in the same case over here near Sky Harbor Airport, and it's like the same thing. It's like nobody knows what to do. Everybody's looking at them. They're almost tired of photographing them, and they're just there. So I'm, as a researcher, trying to figure out what that means. I mean, they're just there, and they're there for a long period of time. And you had mentioned the flotilla in Spain. That was in Madrid.
Just a minute, Paola. For our listeners' sake, but let's just talk a little bit about flotillas in general first, and sort of set this up. Tell us a little bit about the flotillas that first appeared in Mexico and what they looked like.
Okay, now I'm very close to Jaime Maussan, who's the journalist that really disseminates this information the best. He has the best film footage ever, so for your listeners, if they go on Jaime Maussan's website, just Mexican flotillas, they'll see them. They look like, in the case of Mexico City, we're dealing with 200 white circles. They're just white circles. They look like balloons, but they move in a formation. They move all together, and there's usually one that is pulsating and brighter than the others. And over Milano, there was also one that was brighter than the others. It wasn't pulsating. It was brighter than the others. And the flotillas of Mexico City is an ongoing phenomenon. Jaime has film footage from 2004, usually January, February, and March of 2004 over Mexico City. And film footage is incredible. So there's something going on in Mexico City. And so this year, on January 5th, a flotilla of about 20 UFOs went over Madrid, and that has been reported on Frank Warren's site. Frank Warren has a blogspot site, and there's a photograph of that from this year that look very much like the flotillas of Mexico. They're not birds. They definitely are not balloons. They move in a formation, an intelligent formation. And if we're having these sightings over these major cities, Whitley, you had mentioned you thought that this was kind of a cosmic message, and I believe it is too.
Oh, I think it is, absolutely. And just, folks, for your information, Jaime Maussan's website is ovnis.tv. That's OVNIS.tv. And Frank Harris's website is
Frank Warren.
Frank Warren, excuse me. His website is http://frankwarren.blogspot.com. And there you will find a photograph of the very lovely Paola Harris, as well as more description of what's going on in Italy. Now let's go on to this, the significance, because these things in the past, when there have been extraordinary UFO events, they have had a significance. Paola, could you tell us a little bit about what your studies indicate that significance might be?
Well, for the most part, UFO sightings are usually over either military or nuclear bases, where there's where there are nuclear missiles or there are nuclear devices. I mean, they're not just in the middle of nowhere for no reason. So I feel that, first of all, if you try to correlate some of the world events that are happening right now, we have a tremendous amount of tension here in Europe. And I live in Rome, so I know, I live with it every day. We have a lot of tension. We have a lot of religious tension. We have a situation that could go one way or another. And I think that when we're humans, or the human species, look at the skies, or are prone to look at the skies, we kind of take ourselves out of this planetary plane and start looking at ourselves as a planet. And I don't know if the message could be, Whitley, watch what you're doing, because the planet is, in danger. And the fact that there's another fact, I talked to Jaime Maussan about this. The reason why some of these flotillas are in religious countries or spiritually based, like Mexico City, like Madrid, not in the case of Milano as much, but Italy is a Catholic country. Maybe on that level, it's kind of a message. I mean, that's a possibility.
Well, maybe that is a possibility. And, there's another, I had the sense from your quote that we quoted on Unknown Country, in fact, you said that you had a feeling that something big was about to happen. And what is that feeling? Can you kind of get into that a little bit? Or, well, wait a minute, Paola, we're just coming up on the break, so why don't we just take the break a minute or so early? And when we get back, we'll get into a little bit about what Paola is feeling about what this might mean. This is Whitley Strieber at Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back talking to Paola Harris. Her website, paolaharris.it. That's paolaharris.it. She is a very prominent Italian UFO researcher. We are talking right now about the extraordinary sighting that took place in Milan a few days ago. 6 hours UFOs hung over the city. They were not weather balloons because they changed shape and color and they moved during this sighting. Also, weather balloons are coded to be radar visible, and they were not radar visible at all. So it's an extraordinary sighting, 6 hours over a major city. Paola, do you have a sense that they may have been trying to tell us something even more immediate, perhaps that they might represent some great event about to take place?
Well, I don't get the sense that there's going to be a mass world sighting unless we have a mass world war. I mean, I have a feeling that I've been told, and I've talked to a lot of contactees, that if we get to a point where we're going to self-destruct the whole entire planet, that there will be intervention. So that's a possibility. And I hate to think that we're going in that route, but certainly things are not stable on a world level if your listeners are watching television at all, and it's very bad over here. There's a lot of tension. And so I think that the sighting being near an airport, and it is near an airport, in Phoenix also it's near an airport, it's, what you're looking at is a situation where, you ask yourself, what's happening? The photographer said he didn't know how to handle it. Nobody knew what to do. They didn't scramble planes because they're not on the radar. But so that then we have to look at it on another level. We have to look at it on a kind of an esoteric level. The debunkers are out there, though, Whitley. I mean, they're going to be saying it's light effects and all kinds of things. Going back to what might happen, I have a feeling it's going to be a political event more than a UFO event.
When you say there's a lot of tension in Italy, it's true here too. I've noticed on the internet, for example, there's just a constant undertone of basically hoaxes and fake predictions of doom. There was a guy called Super Bowl Sam. We had the U.S. Big football game here recently, and he was saying there was going to be an atomic bomb blown off in the Super Bowl by the government in order to mimic a terrorist attack. Of course, it didn't happen. Now there's another guy out there saying that that Israel and the United States are going to drop atom bombs on Iran in March. Probably won't happen either. And it's just one thing like that after another. There's a feeling, I would say, of kind of disquiet that's causing these people to come out of the woodwork. And, you know, in the past, for example, over Japan in 1743, and it could have been a different date, but in any case, there was a protracted series of UFO sightings that caused riots, and eventually the government collapsed. And of course, in those days, there were no weather balloons. So when this whole problem was eventually solved by the scientists of the era, who were also among, I guess, the first debunkers, when they explained to the emperor that it was nothing more than the wind making the stars sway. That seemed to calm everybody down. So,
well, I think that people are more sensitized, don't you, today in 2006 about sightings, and I think that, you know, everybody that was present there, and I wish I was present there, are probably saying, "What's happening? What's going on? What are they doing?" Now, the tension that we have here is more with the situation with the Danish cartoons, the Muslim cartoons that the Muslim world is protesting, and our news just showed that the attacks on the Danish embassy and the Norwegian embassy. So the Norwegian and Danish have become also now a target for the protesters, and they're all young people. I see they're young people protesting. So the tension, if you want to know what the tension is, it's getting worse and worse as far as the young people in London and in Iraq just going after these embassies for those cartoons. It could be just a way of escalating a tension situation. Since there's tension, and since there's the sighting, and since I'm always looking at political events because I'm a journalist, I'm attaching that together, Whitley, but it could also mean that if we look at the UFO phenomenon and disclosure, that maybe whatever is visiting us, whatever visitors we have, are a little tired about our dragging our feet with disclosure.
Well, that could be true. Because there's never the whole Western world. There are very few countries in the world, Chile being one, and I believe Peru another, which are even slightly open-minded about this. Most countries are like the United States, some are even worse. But I know that Jaime, has much as has occurred in Mexico, as much video as there has been, and as effective, incredibly effective communicator that Jaime has been, there is still this level of resistance. And I've lived with it too, and I come from that. I was... Before I had my close encounter, I would have laughed in your face when you claimed that these were really UFOs. I have to be honest with you. But now, obviously, my eyes have been opened in a big way. There is an intellectual arrogance in people. I felt it. I lived it. Where you really don't want to think that there would be somebody on a higher plane with more technology and probably more knowledge, maybe even smarter than we are, who's here and decides not even to talk to us, but to just sit back and kind of watch. It makes you feel like you're supposed to be the top of the food chain and a big intellectual, but it makes you feel like somebody thinks of you as a little animal, and it's really frustrating. So,
well, I imagine it is. I think one of the things about the way we can look at this phenomenon, Whitley, though, is if we can connect the dots, and that's the name of my book, but it's mostly what I do. I'm trying to figure out what is a flotilla doing in Madrid, what is a flotilla doing in Mexico City, and why are we having sightings, and why are they in the January, from the January to March situation this year, I think is going to be a tense situation. I think if somebody wanted to plot this, we also had a sighting here in Rome the same night. We had a sighting near the water, near Civitavecchia, of 2 discs. I didn't even mention that.
No, what about the sighting in Rome? Tell us about that.
Well, that's near the water. It was near the ocean. Actually, it's near the airport. Now that I mention it, it's near Civitavecchia, which is near the Fiumicino airport, and there were 2 discs, and they were reported. And how do we know this? Because in Italy, we do report it in the newspaper. It was reported in the newspaper. 3 different newspapers reported the Milan sighting. You know, the thing that I guess as a journalist is thing that bothers me the most is the absence of media coverage. In the United States. I mean, I will tell you that I have the newspapers, and I'll show them to you sometime, of the flyover of Washington, D.C. in 2002, which was on the front page of our Corriere della Sera. That plus, 3 different newspapers are reporting the Milan thing. Plus, when the Mexico City UFO, the 11 UFOs that were caught in the infrared, and that the Ministry of Defense of Mexico City asked for help of all the other countries to see if they had the same problem, because, the implication of only seeing UFOs in the infrared is serious. Because they're out there. You just don't see them unless you have an infrared camera. And that was on all our television channels. So we get a lot more media coverage. Paul Hellier's.
None of that was here.
Yeah.
But of course,
Paul Hellier's Canadian speech.
Go ahead.
That was reported in our newspaper.
Now, tell us more about this. We know so little about this here because we have I wouldn't say it's a sort of a press that's controlled by kind of mutual agreement. They know the government takes a dim view of UFO reports. And so increasingly over the years, 10 or 15 years ago, we had a lot of UFO reports, even in the New York Times, up until the CIA asked them to stop reporting on the subject in 1977. Even they reported these things, but no more. It's all gone from the United States press, so we don't get to know any of these things. You're telling me things I'm hearing for the first time, and I'm sure my listeners are too. So it's shocking, actually shocking. And now, a lot of us know about the 2004 Washington flyovers, but a lot of us don't. Why don't you tell us a little bit about these, forgetting the fact that they happened in our country? We just didn't get told.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, 2 incidents. The 2002 was in July, the same day of the flyover from 1952. Now, that's a famous flyover, 1952. Flyover of Washington, D.C. of UFOs. There's even photos of those.
Oh, yes. That's one of the all-time famous ones.
Right. Well, 50 years later, to the day, there was another flyover of Washington, D.C. We covered it on the front page of our papers, and I got some documents from Clifford Stone that shows also that it was reported on a very small level. Now, I don't think the aliens have watches or calendar. So a flyover 50 years to the day, it might be telling us something. It's to the day. And then the other thing that will surprise you a little is I did an interview in England with the Honorable ex-Minister of Defense from Canada, Paul Hellyer, who stated in a speech, and we have a speech and we have the video here, that he doesn't want President Bush to put a base on the moon because he thinks that he's doing it to monitor alien civilizations. And he says, and this is the ex-Minister of Defense, UFOs are as real as airplanes. Now, this is not just somebody off the street. So Paul Hellyer's courage to come out with that went all over the world. I mean, I did 2 or 3 interviews on his speech because I was supposed to be at that conference where he spoke in Toronto. So, these are things that were covered in the Italian newspaper. It was covered in the Stampa of Torino. Now, Torino's where the Olympics are, so maybe you might start looking at that. I mean, the Olympics start pretty soon. Milano's near Torino. So maybe these world events or these looking at, the positioning, the 50 years to the day, if somebody was doing a serious study, they could really connect these dots.
Well, oddly enough, I was trying to find something on the internet about the July 2002 flyover, and one of the things I found was a diary entry written by my wife Anne on July the 22nd. We commemorated the 50-year before flyover without knowing that the new one had taken place.
Well, I can send you some of the documentation Clifford Stone sent me. I mean, we know that happened. It was also in our newspaper.
Well, it's
I can send you a copy of the newspaper.
Lack of information here on this side of the pond. It's really scary. Well, at least it's, and of course in England it's always the reports are always joke reports, except in places like the Independent, which will occasionally have a fairly reasonable report. We're going to take a little break now, Paola. When we get back, we're going to get into some of the more remarkable cases that Paola studied, especially the case of Charles Hall and the Tall Whites. This is Whitley Strieber at Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Paola Harris. Her website, paolaharris.it. That's for Italy. Paola is in Italy. We're experiencing a little bit of distortion in her voice, and I'm sorry for that. But unfortunately, sometimes these calls to very distant places are just like that, and there's nothing we can do about it. In any case, please bear with us. Paola Harris also has a book, Connecting the Dots, a book about a UFO, a group of UFO, the greatest, in fact, UFO investigators, and asking them what they think is going on. Now, Paola, one of the most remarkable stories I have ever heard is the story of Charles Hall. Charles Hall, who was a weather observer at Nellis Air Force Base and came into contact with beings he calls the Tall Whites. Interestingly enough, and this is just an aside, Glynis Mackay has received what she believes is some sort of a message. She doesn't say if it's from the Tall Whites or not, to come to the UFO conference that's being held in Laughlin, Nevada. That's UFOcongress.com, by the way, at the end of February and early March because of something. She doesn't know what. Maybe it has to do with the Tall Whites. Paola, tell us a little bit about how you first came into contact and found out about Charles Hall.
Well, now that you mentioned that, I will be at that conference, so I will look for her. I am covering that conference from Italy. Okay, about 3 years ago, I came across Charles and Marie Hall in Roswell, New Mexico. He was selling his book as science fiction, but I sat down and I spoke to him at length. And as I was speaking, I looked at him because usually when I cover a story, I look at people's eyes. And as he's talking to me, I'm realizing he's recounting real experiences, and I was blown away. So I said to him, can I come and visit you and do extensive, interviewing with video and so forth? And as I was doing this, I also called in let's call it a Mulder Scully situation, a pilot from Frontier Airlines, named David Coote. He's a captain, and he, with me, did this story for 2.5 years, and David and I tried to cross-check Charles's story by asking the help of a Los Angeles police detective. This policeman had heard me on George Noory, and he wanted to help, and he found for us 3 witnesses that were on the base with Charles, and we were able to call them and substantiate some of the story. Now, the witnesses' names are in the book in other name forms. In other words, they're not the real name. But those witnesses verified a lot of the situations. They were not involved with the Tall Whites, but they verified certain things that happened and how they were scared to death and how nobody wanted to take readings because there was something out there. Then David Coote and I flew Charles Hall to the Indian Springs area. We spent 2 days with him out there videotaping him, and we have done a DVD of that videotape with Charles recounting the story. That's on my website. So as he's walking around and showing us what happened and where, not on the base, but just outside, because, you know, the tall whites used to walk across the street near the there's an ice cream parlor there, and there's also a casino. He explained as they would walk into the town. We were right there, and what I did was watch him recount a real-life situation. Now, I'm so happy I did it with another researcher, Whitley, because I thought I was going crazy hearing this.
Well, I can imagine that. Now, let's get back to the substantiation you received from the other people. Exactly what did they tell you?
Well, one of the people that that we called was one of the people in Charles's book that had taken the crowbar and hit the tall white little boy. And
now,
we
tell us
asked
a little
him,
bit more about this, because we don't know this story at all. Tell us.
You don't know the story. There were 3 books, and some of the
No. I mean, we know about Charles Hall, but we don't know the specific story about the tall white child being hit.
There's so many of them. Well, some of the people who were stationed out there couldn't handle the actual interaction with these beings because they were a little different. I mean, they were white skin and almond-shaped blue eyes and very transparent hair and very skinny, very, very thin. So and they had children, and this is what was blowing my mind. This story dealt with children, and I hardly ever encountered that. But anyway, in one of the storylines that he's got there, one of the men who was freaked out by seeing a tall white child took a crowbar and threw it at the child, and the tall whites in retaliation were going to kill him. I mean, he threw it at the child and broke his arm. And in the book, Charles says that their bones take years to heal because they're very, very fragile. So this was a case where it was an accident, and the generals on the base, because these beings dealt with the generals, I mean, there were a lot of military upper level of people that were interacting with these whites, and this is 1965, remember. They kind of begged off that they would not do anything to this one Air Force gentleman. And so when we called him, we asked him if he had ever remembered.
You're saying you talked to the person who threw the crowbar.
Yeah, we had to. I'm not going to bring out a story unless I talk to at least 3 or 4 people that are on the base with him. So we tracked him down after 40 years thanks to the LAPD. It's like, we tracked some of these people down. David and I did a very, very good job on this story. I would have never brought this story out.
Now, what did he say?
Well, he said he remembers that this is what his words were now, Whitley, so try to understand. He says, oh, yeah, I remember that situation. He said, I threw a crowbar at a white rabbit.
A white rabbit? That's what he said?
He called it a white rabbit. Yep.
How fascinating.
A white rabbit. That's all. He remembered all the other situations about playing cards with Charles, about being freaked out about something being out there, about the rumors that there were aliens out there, about the flyovers. They were craft around. And when we asked him about the crowbar incident, he answered, I remember that. I remember throwing it at a white rabbit. Now, what's the white rabbit doing out in
white rabbit in the desert in Nevada? I'm sorry, they're not out there.
No, what that is a screen memory of a situation.
Of course,
he was given a screen memory of, but he verified it. I have it. We have that testimony, as we have other testimony. And these people, these witnesses, didn't want to be mentioned, but no. We have them, and we did it. We checked it out. For me, what was important was actually taking Charles to the Indian Springs area and doing the DVD that we did.
Well, tell us about that, because you can get the DVD. It's shipped from right here in Boulder, Colorado, folks. You can get it on our website, paolaharris.it. It doesn't ship from Italy, and it's only $20. Probably well worth your time and money. I'm certainly going to get one. But go ahead, Paola.
So I'll send you one, because actually you can see Charles when he's talking, and you can see that he's remembering the incidents, and he remembers them exactly. I mean, I know Charles for 2.5 years. He hasn't changed one word. And he remembers them as, you know, for him, it was terrifying when he first met them, and they didn't tell him that he would be meeting them, and he had to deal with it in his own way. And after a while that he had, you know, developed a protocol, and this interests me very much. And I'm going to add something else. I am very interested in exopolitics. I'm working with Dr. Michael Sala because I believe that we need to develop protocols, because I asked Charles, well, what'd you do? Did you go up and shake hands with them? I mean, what do you do when you're working with these people on the same base? And he said, no, you stand very still, he said. And he said that he had to stand still, and when the kids came around, he had to be very careful not to raise his voice if they would touch something they weren't supposed to or whatever. I mean, the interaction between these tall whites and Charles Hall is an excellent example of what protocol is, you know, when we have guests like this. And I have to tell you, I believe that story. I did that story. That's a 2.5-year research, and there's so much more to that story.
So much more in what sense?
Well, I think there's a lot of things he hasn't talked about yet. I mean, he's come out, he has a few more stories. On my website, there's the story of the alien doctor that wanted to take away one of Charles's letters. And the protocol was that they weren't to take away anything from Earth. They couldn't take away anything so Charles worked it out in a way that he threw the letter away so that the alien doctor could take it. Because the letter expressed, you know, Charles's feelings for his father. And this alien doctor, who he said was very mature and very intellectual, wanted to take something human written with him. So, I mean, that's on my website. That's one of the stories. And Charles has so many more. I mean, they're not even in his book. So I think that he remembers these incidents because they're very powerful in his life. He's a very intelligent man. He was placed there by mistake on purpose. But you know, it's an incredible, I think it's one of the biggest stories in ufology.
Oh, I think it is too, and now the story has been remarkably corroborated by Glynis Mackay, who we are in the process of getting in touch with Charles and his wife. Glynis is the head of MUFON in Australia, and Glynis has had a series of the most remarkable encounters, all of them with the tall whites in Australia and in Hawaii. And it sort of sheds light, a little bit more light, on why they are here. As those of you who are subscribers to our website know from listening to her story, what happened, one of the many things that happened was she was dying of cancer in 1968, and was approached by one of these tall whites and told to go to a certain house where she would receive a cure. And she did, and the man knew she was coming. There were other people in the place getting healed in different ways. And then as she and her mother-in-law, who had accompanied her, left, the man said, look up as you leave, and you will see corroboration. You will see confirmation that this is real. And they looked up, and there were 2 silver discs in the sky, which a few moments later flew away. 6 weeks after that, she was declared free of cancer and no longer in danger. It's not the only kind of healing thing that has happened, and one begins to wonder, in a larger sense, could the tall whites be here with some sort of a message, or why are they here?
Well, in Charles's case, first of all, they lived to be 800 years old. So if you can fathom that and digest that, that's pretty heavy. He said they had been here during the presidency of Monroe. So we're talking about they were watching the people going across the prairie. And their base was in the desert because of the type of life they live. I mean, they live in apartments in the mountains. I mean, in the darkness. And the thing is that, yeah, if they've been visiting, they told Charles this was a way station. well, a way station. It's a way station between planets. You stop somewhere. It was a sanctioned way station. And the amazing part about the Charles Hall story, is the children they brought with them. Because his book has all the things the children did and how the children expressed themselves and, how they were looking at him painting by numbers and doing all these things that children probably bored stiff on the base.
When we get back, we got to take a little break, Paola, but when we get back, we're going to talk about the children. Were they born here, and does that make them aliens? And we're going to start to talk a little bit about exopolitics. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. I'm talking with Paola Harris. There's a little bit of distortion on the line, and again, we apologize for that. But the call is going between California and Italy, and unfortunately, sometimes on these very long-distance calls, that just happens, and it's unavoidable. So just listen past that little bit of distortion. I think this is really a remarkable interview. And now, Paola, when we left the air, we were talking about the tall whites and their children and their children's being born. And it occurred to me, if they've been here since the time of Monroe, of President Monroe, then probably some of these children have been born here. What are they, Paola? They're born in the United States? Are they U.S. citizens?
Well, you're asking political questions there, Whitley. Let me talk about it. Yeah, because to me, I'm interested in this ethics too. First of all, in his book, in Charles Hall's book, he mentions a tall white girl named Pamela, and Pamela was born here. Was born on the base on the Indian, the part of Area 51 that he calls Area 53. He said it was 53 and 54 near Indian Springs. She was born there. And so but it doesn't mean since she was born there that she didn't go back and forth to their home planet, because from what I understand, they came and went at the full moon. I mean, in the book, he talks about the landings and the leavings. They come and go. I don't know if they look at politics the way we do. Maybe it's planet Earth instead of United States or Italy or Russia or whatever. Maybe they haven't divided their planet into individual countries that are battling each other. Whitley, you mentioned exopolitics, and I'm grateful to you for mentioning it, because as a journalist and having started with Hynek, I am way, way past the citing stage. I am into the trying to figure out stage and the protocol stage, and have read Dr. Michael Sala's book on exopolitics, and I'm working with him on an Exopolitics Institute trying to develop protocols. They're looking at what do you do when you have this kind of situation?
And
what do we on a grassroots level do?
Just let me stop you for a moment, Paola. Paola, her Exopolitics and Michael Sala's Exopolitics work can be found at exopolitics.org. That's exopolitics.org. Exopolitics.org. Go ahead, Paola.
So when you ask a question like, was she born in the United States? Or what kind of protocol do you have when you have children here? Or what if you meet some being from another place? Should you rush up and touch him? You would never do that in the Virginia case, because in the Virginia case, if you talk to A.J. Gevhard, one of the policemen that put the alien on his lap to take him back to the hospital died because of the contamination.
He bled out.
Yeah, well, he died because you don't just run up and put him on your lap. I mean,
well, we found that out at our cabin in upstate New York. When I would have groups of people there, every once in a while, there would be cases such as the case of Raven Dana, where they would actually touch each other. In other words, she held out her hand and the being held her hand, and she had a tremendous allergy attack. By the next day, her eyes were swollen closed. So I know that, and I had, to be honest, they even experimented on me with an allergy, with something to try to keep the histamine response down, which had the very, very bizarre effect of causing my skin to become dead of all sensation. And when I took a shower after they had left, because I always felt a little bit dirty. I mean, it was not. It was really. I just felt it was prudent. I could see the water beating on my skin, but it was like I was inside a tent. But go ahead, please.
Well, see, this is the reaction you have. We need to talk about these things because this isn't hypothetical anymore. We're not joking around here and looking at sightings. We're dealing with real contact. And the Charles Hall story is 1965, which blows me away because 1965 we didn't even have Close Encounters.
No.
We didn't have any of the movies. We had nothing. Poor Charles.
Now, the witnesses who you talked to who said that they felt like there was something out there, why did they say that? Because
they felt there was something out there. They were terrified. They said
out in the hills above Nellis.
Yes, in the hills above Nellis. They said that they knew that the weather observers refused to take the weather readings and they would just fake it. They would call them in and just fake the readings. Charles is like this. I mean, if you meet him, he's like this. He's very particular. Charles took every single solitary weather report. He went out there at 4 in the morning and at 6 in the morning, and he went out there and did it. But when he did that, he put himself in a situation where he had no choice but to have a close encounter with not only the children and the teacher. These are the people that he talks about in the book, but the guards, and one of the guards named Range 4 Harry. Range 4 Harry, in those days they used to wear suits, these aliens, to kind of float above the ground, and these suits from far away would have these sparks that look like, radioactive sparks. And so everything,
Paola, just to stop for a moment, speaking of the suits that they wore, do you know that a group of Indian scientists from India, just in September, witnessed something moving above the ground in the Himalayas in a suit, just like you are describing? Quite a large number of them, and of course this isn't reported anywhere, but I think we have a story about that this week in our unknowncountry.com newsletter. So folks, if you sign up for our free newsletter, you won't get spammed, but you will get stories like this. In any case, this has been seen elsewhere in the world just very recently, but go ahead.
Well, if you want to touch the Himalayas, I have a witness here who lives right near one of the particular mountains of the Himalayas and sees the UFOs go in and out of the Himalayas constantly. India has all kinds of sightings. But going back to the actual suit, what we're dealing with is in the 60s, they were wearing these suits, and that was what they would be seeing in the desert. So there's all kinds of myths around that, and the people that we talked to said that the myth of Range 4 Harry was something they talked about all the time because it was a ghost. For them, they were ghosts because they didn't actually stay out there and do the readings the way Charles did. Charles did what he was supposed to. And Charles had the encounter, but also Charles passed a certain intelligence test before he even went into the Air Force. He was one of the highest scorers, so somebody in the Pentagon, somebody in the Air Force knew they were placing Charles there. And I mean, if you look at the way the whole thing came about, they figured Charles could handle it, and since it's a protocol situation, because he said there was an ambassador, and then there was a bird colonel with him, then Charles was somebody that could handle it. Charles was someone that could deal with the situation. He was the token human. Charles himself calls himself Charles the Gorilla. Because the kids couldn't see any other kids. I mean, they could only see Charles and they could see him doing things. Even though I have talked to Wendell Stevens and he has some cases of tall whites getting on a school bus with kids, or a bus, not necessarily a school bus, out of Indian Springs. And Wendell has 2 or 3 cases like that he shared with me that people had told him about.
Well, the tall whites have a tendency to show up unexpectedly in odd places. Last year at the UFO Congress in Laughlin, which has incidentally been the site of many, many protracted and quite extraordinary UFO sightings during that conference, Jerry Zeitlin, who has reported this again in our subscriber section, has said that he believes he saw a tall white in the conference center, surrounded by people who looked like to him like plainclothes guards. He couldn't get near her, but he felt that that's what she was. And now I'm wondering, I have to tell you, this year I find out you heavily involved in the tall whites and a real expert on this, probably the leading expert on this in the world, aside from Charles himself, is going to the conference. Glennis, who has been involved with the tall whites virtually all of her life, has suddenly gotten such a strong call that she literally picked up the telephone from in Brisbane, Australia, and made reservations to come to the conference without even knowing why. She's not a speaker or anything. So what would you do if you saw a tall white there? How would you react?
Well, after all these years of research I've done, I would love it. I mean, I have never seen a UFO, Whitley, and certainly I have not seen an alien. And I have been working so hard and in a very professional manner for 30 years since I worked with Alan Hynek. How would I react? I probably would react with utter respect, and I wouldn't move because
they're very sensitive about us moving near them because they're so fragile.
Also, they don't know what we're going to do. I mean, I will also tell you, I did go to see the Billy Meyer in Switzerland and have done some research on Billy Meyer. And if you read what the Pleiadians say, they actually measure our brainwaves before they come near us because we tend to freak out. We tend to do terrible things. I mean, in the case of the one witness that threw the crowbar at the boy, at the little, the tall white boy.
Oh, listen, I'm responsible. I did it myself. I mean, one of them came into our bedroom one time in the evening when I was wide awake, and I threw just so impulsively, I threw the little nightstand and the lamp at it. And then he went down and showed up in my brother's house, and my brother threw a guitar at him. So, I know what you're talking about. This wasn't a tall white, this was a gray. But yes, it does happen. Now, we're getting close to the end of our time together, and for our subscribers this week, I'm going to be doing something I've been trying to do for a long time, but something has been happening to me. You heard Paola mention earlier that one of the witnesses remembered throwing the crowbar at a white rabbit, a mysterious, obvious screen memory. Well, I get asked questions, and people send me letters by the thousands on the internet, and for some reason, some of these letters have been sparking responses from me where I've described to the people events I don't remember until I actually sit down and write the email, like a screen memory suddenly lifts because of something they said in their email. And I'm going to be reading some of those responses and discussing them and trying to get a little deeper into the parts of my own experience that remain hidden even from me in the subscriber section this week. So, Paola, let's just conclude a little bit. I'm sure a lot of us are going to see you at the conference. Any thoughts of maybe going to Indian Springs again, say with Glennis Mackay, maybe?
Now that you've told me, but I'd like to meet Glennis. I don't know her story. Maybe I could email her if you could send me her email.
Sure, I'll send you her email address right away. Oh. And I think Ann and I are going to be at the conference for a couple of days on Friday and Saturday, not as speakers, but basically we're responding to Glennis's call because we feel it means something. Maybe it won't amount to a thing. I don't know, but I'll tell you this.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be glad. I've been there for 2 days already. I mean, I've already been to that area. So, I'd be glad to go, and it's very unusual. I'm not a speaker either, Whitley, but I am accompanying my boss, who is, I write for Area 51 magazine. It's Maurizio Baiada. He's speaking on Colonel Philip Corso, who was here in Italy twice. And so I will be accompanying him. So maybe on Thursday, who knows, maybe destiny will have it.
Oh, maybe this time it will happen, Paola. Well, listen, it's been fabulous having you on Dreamland. And folks, isn't this life a great adventure? There's so much darkness and trouble all around us. But I tell you this, we're having fun. This is Whitley Strieber. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science discovery and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts the others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she's reporting on an interview, and you will hear it, with a gentleman who worked in NORAD and recorded the passage of fast walkers, or UFOs, with very surprising results. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks a lot, Whitley. And first, I thought I'd do a brief update on those strange objects over the skies of New Braunfels, Texas. This goes to the San Antonio Lightning News website report this week that the Federal Aviation Administration has not been able to identify two so-called dark helicopters reported near the ground on a Comal County, Texas ranch. Actually, the ranch is in Guadalupe County, north of New Braunfels in San Antonio. And it was on November 23rd, and then a month later on December 22nd, that Guadalupe County rancher John Coors filed a complaint with the FAA after a black and then another dark blue helicopter intruded where his cattle water and graze. Mr. Coors says he could not see ID markings on either of those helicopters. He told the San Antonio Lightning, quote, "One tried to land by my cattle tank, but left when I approached. It had no number that I could see. My biggest concern is that the helicopters are scaring my cattle, and I wanted to stop," unquote. Mr. Coors did not photograph either of the two intruding helicopters, but out of curiosity, he got a camera to photograph a helicopter flying over his ranch at a higher altitude, which he thought looked like the original offending choppers. And these are the photographs that the San Antonio Lightning ran at its website, and you can also see these photos at my news website, earthfiles.com. Mr. Coors photographed, it turns out, a Robinson 22 or 44 long-tailed small helicopter used for pilot instruction and other civilian work. FAA Inspector Tom Hennessy received copies of this distant shot on the helicopter photos and told San Antonio Lightning that such complaints, quote, "are not uncommon," without explaining why low chopper intrusions are common. Mr. Hennessy also said it is virtually impossible to track down specific helicopters without knowing an ID number. Contributing to the ID challenge is this odd fact. Dark numbers on dark painted aircraft are legal. I talked to rancher John Coors this week about the problem that if dark colored numbers are legal on dark paint, how could anyone be able to see them? Mr. Coors had also received a letter from the FAA inspector saying the agency has closed the case due to insufficient evidence, meaning no ID numbers to investigate. Here is Mr. Coors.
So we don't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a training exercise, they need to go to a training field to do those training exercises. Like I said, I grew up around aircraft, never had a problem with it. I'm in the middle of 68 acres. It's hard to put a helicopter down here any place, even if they are allowed to go right on the deck, without some sort of a consequence. If anybody other than myself walks in among my cattle, they go berserk.
But now you're saying that the catch-22 is, if the helicopter or helicopters that have come down on your property, one to the ground and one close to the ground where your cattle are, and if they are dark-colored, and if the ID numbers are dark, you would have no way of getting ID numbers to report to the FAA in the first place.
That is the only thing I can conclude from this. Now, who that was and what they were doing remain questions that aren't answerable because of that.
Right.
So we can't find out. And there is a very big question: who was that, and what are they doing there? That's still unanswered.
And what you're raising is the question, if the rules are different for helicopters, then there is the potential for abuse, landing near water, near cattle, that can cause problems, and the issue would be why.
Exactly.
While rancher John Kors has been wondering who is in the small, dark helicopters intruding on his Texas ranch, there's another airspace intrusion mystery which has haunted our American military for decades. The intruders are called fast walkers, which are unidentified aerial objects that suddenly appear on radar moving at 1,200 to 1,700 miles an hour. Recently at Earth Files, I received a first-hand report from a former U.S. Air Force Superintendent of Operations for the 1st Command Control Squadron inside NORAD, which is our North American Aerospace Defense Command for the entire Northern Hemisphere. His email is about the fast walkers that he personally tracked on military radar during his 24-year-long Air Force career. The first radar fast walkers that he saw were in 1970 when he was stationed on the island of Okinawa.
Then I went out to Okinawa, where I was on this little island about halfway between the main island and Taiwan. And our job basically was as a flight follower, more or less, for the B-52s that were going into Vietnam. But anyway, that was the first place I had encountered them, and that was in 1970.
Okay, now talk about encountering UFOs through radar.
Well, basically what you see is the old radars that I worked with had roughly a 200-mile range. And you would see, and we used to measure speeds, distance times time equals speed. That was the old thing. And a sweep, in other words, one complete rotation of the antenna took 12 seconds. Mm-hmm. And so there were six sweeps per minute. And we would count the number of sweeps and count the distance the thing traveled and then figure out how fast it was going. Basic, easy math, like 6th grade math stuff. But anyway, we would do that, and we would see something come up on the perimeter of the scope, right out on the end, and within, maybe 5 or 6 sweeps, it was all the way to the other side of the scope. No time at all.
And that would mean it was traveling how fast?
Oh, geez, anywhere from 12 to 1,700 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And our old height finders at the time, now this is 50s vintage radar, would go up to 100,000 feet. And there were times we couldn't even see it. It was gone. And I don't think it was an SR-71. They did fly back then. And the reason I say that, because whenever they went through an area that was considered like in our range of radar, Allied forces or anything like that, they would have what they call a transponder on board. And aircraft still carry them today. All aircraft have them, just about. And that sends out a signal saying, this is me and this is who I am, by code. It's got like a 4-digit code. And we would read that code and we'd say, oh yeah, that's flight so-and-so going to wherever they went, And, but these things didn't squawk anything. They didn't broadcast any kind of a code or anything. They would just appear. Mm-hmm. And then they'd be gone, like I said, anywhere from 4 to maybe half a dozen sweeps, they'd be already across the scope.
So your first radar blips that were related to UFOs was in the 1970s. How did your superior officers explain them to you at the time?
Well, they said it was probably just, it was either weather phenomenon or it was an NSR-71 or something to that effect. They very much just explained it away.
And did you guys accept that?
Well, at the time I was only 19, so who knew any better?
Mm-hmm. Well, what about as your career evolved and you saw more anomalies on radar?
Well, as the career evolved, I got more knowledgeable of radar, understood it better, also understood better the physics behind it. So when something like that would come up, we'd say, well, or at least I would say to myself, well, no, yeah, you can say that's weather, but I know what weather looks like, and that's not weather.
Mm-hmm.
This type of thing. So, I kind of knew better. But on the other hand, I didn't know. It might have been research and development aircraft, for all I knew. Mm-hmm. I didn't know. I honestly did not know what it was.
Well, talk about the experience that you related briefly in your email concerning Men in Black.
Oh, I don't know if that's what they really call themselves, but we would be in the Missile Warning Center. Missile Warning Center is a very interesting place. We used to do line checks there. In other words, we would pick up the phone and push the button to talk to the distant end, and make sure the line worked. And
this is inside of Cheyenne Mountain, inside of NORAD.
Yes, and we would call, for example, a radar site or a satellite facility that tracked, missile data and this type of thing. And we would call at the beginning of each shift, to make sure all the lines worked, to make sure we knew what we were dealing with. That was standard procedure. But it was one of those places where if the phone rang, we didn't know if it was just a line check or if it was World War III, if it was the middle of a shift, It was one of those things. It was a very intense area to work. Basically, what would happen there is we would get what appeared to be a missile launch out of nowhere, places that missiles shouldn't have been, like the middle of the Atlantic, for example, or the middle of the Pacific, or off of the equator, or, could be anywhere. And we would see this, and we would track it, and we treated all launches the same. It didn't matter if it was a space shuttle or a Soviet launch out of Terracan. It didn't make any difference. We would treat them all the same because it would be practice for us. So we always worked it. And anyway, we would see one of these things come up out of the middle of nowhere, and we'd log it all down, and we'd run the normal data sequences and all this, and present it to the forward users, as in, Department of Defense, Fort Ritchie, Maryland, the White House, the Pentagon, all the people up there. Well, every once in a while, these guys would come in civilian clothes, and they'd say, well, we'd like to see your logbook. And, of course, we'd have to turn everything over to them. And, we give them all the tapes and all the teletypes and everything that came through, because at the time we still used teletype back then. And we give it all to them, and they disappear.
Did they ever show you any ID about who they were?
No, not to me. And I was the crew chief at the time. I was not the person in charge. I was the crew chief. In other words, I was the head enlisted guy.
And would somebody call you and say, these men are going to come, they will not be named, they will not be wearing badges, they will not have to ID themselves, but they are going to take your radar data?
I never received a call like that, but I don't know if our officer in charge did or his second.
How normal is it in the military to have people in black suits show up and be able to take everything without some clearance?
Well, we all had access badges, and those access badges had numbers printed on them that you were allowed to go into and allowed to obtain data from. Everything is a need-to-know basis in the military. Well, these guys would come in, because we would examine everybody's badge before they come in the door. Well, these guys had nothing blacked out on their badges. All the numbers were exposed, so they could go anywhere. And, I guess I really don't know if anybody was called and told that we were going to get a visit from them or not. I would imagine, our actual crew chief for the entire crew, which meant the command post, missile warning, the space surveillance center, intelligence, all the departments that worked in Cheyenne Mountain were headed up by a general. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he probably got a call, and then he disseminated down to the respective areas that needed to know.
And you and I would just assume that anybody who was able to come into Cheyenne Mountain and walk into your office where you had classified radar information and that they could share this badge with these numbers, that they would then have the need to know and you'd hand it to them without question.
As far as I knew, yes.
Were you ever debriefed by anyone about these unidentifieds being something extraterrestrial, interplanetary, or any words like that used?
No, they didn't actually say that. What they would do is come back anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours later with our logbook. And the logbook, if it was something that was pertinent, they needed to have not known, that page would disappear. It would come out of the logbook. And they come back and they say, here you go, and they say, you look at us and basically say something like, by the way, guys, you didn't see anything, or this launch didn't exist, or, something to that effect. And we just say, okay, whatever it takes.
Well, how would that make you feel?
Well, that's, in the field I was in, you just accept it, because I had a top-secret clearance, as everybody did in there. Our phone number was classified. We couldn't even answer. If we got an outside call in, it would go through the NORAD operator and then be piped into us. we couldn't even answer the phone missile warning siren. We had to answer it with the 4-digit number that our extension was.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those kind of things. And so if somebody said, you didn't see anything, we'd say, okay, we didn't see anything. That's simple. And you didn't question it, you didn't ask about it. That's just the way it was.
But did you think about it?
Well, of course you think about it.
And what did you think could explain these men taking all this radar data and then telling you that nothing happened?
My crew, at least. And I can't speak, there were 5 crews, but I can speak for my crew. We would dig into the books, and we'd try to figure out if it was actually a radar anomaly of some sort, which one it originated from. It was a satellite anomaly. We'd try to figure out which one it originated from, and we would try to get down to the bottom of it to try to figure out what was going on. And some were anomalies. They turned out to actually be anomalies, and other ones weren't.
Mm-hmm. What was the most anomalous case you can remember?
I would say just the extremely fast-moving and high objects. Occasionally, we would get a launch out of the Pacific or the Atlantic or something.
Where nothing would be to launch anything.
Well, as far as we knew. See, that's the whole thing.
And what is your own thinking today about the phrase extraterrestrial biological entity that's come up in leaked government documents? Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso of the Army wrote in his book The Day After Roswell, before he died, that he had first-hand knowledge of back engineering of extraterrestrial technology.
Oh, I don't doubt it's there. I have no doubt in my mind that there are extraterrestrials out there.
After I posted this source's original email at Earth Files, I received the following response from another knowledgeable viewer, quote, I wanted to write you and verify one of the military email messages that you posted on your website entitled, quote, U.S. Air Force radar, vertically rising fast walkers. What this person wrote about his time in the NORAD Missile Warning Center is definitely true. From 1983 to 1987, I was an enlisted Air Force computer maintenance tech at Cheyenne Mountain, and from 1987 to 1988, I worked in a part of the automated intelligence upgrade program at NORAD. I had a top-secret STI clearance and was one of a very few techs allowed in every part of the complex. I frequently worked in the Missile Warning Center and have experienced the very thing that he described, down to the visits and the instructions that came with the visits, meaning men in black. It got to be a pretty regular thing. I also had access to the command post, space operations, intel, SPADOC, and other very sensitive areas. What he mentioned is just the tip of the iceberg, unquote. Highly strange aerial anomalies are as common now as they were in previous decades. And this week, I also received a fascinating report from a microwave tower technician working right now between Southern California and Yuma, Arizona. This week, on February 8th, he sent me the following email with a drawing of what he saw around 11 p.m. Arizona time on Tuesday evening, February 7th, on Interstate 8, about 13 miles west of Yuma on the California side of the border. As I read excerpts from this email, I am hoping that Dreamland listeners might have some more information about this extraordinary aerial sighting. And this is now a quote. I was driving to a microwave tower site in the mountains between Yuma, Arizona, and southeastern California, and I saw something that I have never seen before. I estimated from my Atlas map that a large military installation was around 10 to 12 miles away from my vehicle and directly in front of me at the time on the road that I was traveling. It was totally dark outside due to the late hour. Suddenly, there was what appeared to be several huge, and I mean really huge, fluorescent white beams of light. They were all of the same length and spaced evenly apart, coming down at about a 45-degree angle out of the sky. The fixed-length beams of bright white light appeared to come out of blackness, probably from at least a couple of thousand feet in the atmosphere, and in a reasonably slow pace made their way to the ground. There are mountains or hills in a way, so I could not see the destination. The lights reminded me of the Luxor in Las Vegas. Only the thickness, length, and brightness of the Luxor lights is a pittance compared to what I saw. There were only about 7 or 8 of these light beams, lasting a total of about 20 to 30 seconds, and then they stopped. After contemplating these lights and their slow downward slide, they appeared to be some kind of guiding lights. I just know that they were absolutely huge, thick, and bright, and were most certainly a technological phenomenon, not a natural one. The size of these lights and the distance they traveled, as if down a tight cable, easily dwarfed the size of 500 to 1,000-foot communication towers. And if the lights were closer to 20 miles away, nearer to the center of that military installation, they would definitely each have had to be the size of a mountain. I could see nothing else due to the darkness except that within 1 minute, there was a yellowish light just off to the west of where the fluorescent lights had come. It, too, must have been 2,000 or more feet above the ground. I thought it must be some kind of flare light, except it did not move in any trajectory. It appeared to be perfectly still. It lit up in a pattern and was not white, but a yellowish orange. Another tech that I met at the site had seen this yellowish orange light before, but had never seen the white tubular beams. Do you have any idea what I might have seen, or do you think this is some type of technology that the public has not been told about? Now, I have his drawing. To the best of his ability, he's on the road, and he did this through a computer from one of his draft sketch marks of what it is that he saw in the sky. It's quite unusual. And we have been able, through maps, to find that the area, which is north of Brawley, California, and not far from where he saw these extraordinary and disconnected beams of light, must be the Chocolate Mountain Aerial Gunnery Range, which takes up 387,000 acres north of Brawley. And the question is, Whitley, what in the world would be the technology that would generate these kinds of light tubes in the sky in 2006, when the only piece of research in all of my memory over the last 26 years that would come close to this was in the 70s at Fort Stewart in Savannah, Georgia. That was an amazing UFO event, and there was a husband and wife in the military who watched what they said was a truncated beam of light coming out of a disc. I'm not saying these are one and the same, but this is truly, truly strange.
Well, Linda, it is. It's extremely strange. And the whole story is, as usual, I mean, we learned to expect you to come up with some very strange but highly credible stories. A reporter for, I guess it was the Army Times, called Jim Cannan back in 1989, told me that he had gotten information directly from a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, essentially that he didn't call them fast walkers, that these unusual objects were tracked quite frequently at NORAD, and that they themselves did not know much about what they were. And right. So, obviously, I mean, I'm sure that these interviews are perfectly credible. These people are quite simply telling the truth. And I hope that Paola Harris's discussion, listeners that you just heard a few minutes ago, that extraordinary sighting in Milan means that maybe over the next 5 or 6 years things will change, because after all, the authors of this secrecy ain't the United States government, it's the visitors themselves. It has to be. Well, Linda, that was very intense. Thank you so much. Next week on Dreamland, Jim Mars and that there is a slight distortion in her replies to my questions due to the fact that we are dealing with very long, ultra-long distance lines between California and Italy, and it just crept in. We have done everything we can here, our sound man, to reduce this sound, and I just want to say that we're aware of it, and we're sorry that it's there, but please listen anyway, because this is truly one extraordinary dreamland. Plus, for you subscribers, I am going to be doing something that I've been trying to do for a long time. There is a lot of my experience. After all, I was involved with the visitors for 11 years, and I've written about maybe 5% of it. There is a lot that is beginning to come back to me in a strange way. I read a lot of your emails, especially the ones that are describing experiences, and there seem to be sparking memories in me that I haven't really ever addressed before. But when I remember them, they seem perfectly clear, but I don't remember them on a day-to-day basis. And I've written them down in emails to some of you, sending them back and describing my own experiences. And I'm going to be talking about these experiences for subscribers. These are things I've never spoken about before. And now let's go on to Whitley Strieber and Paola Harris. Well, there have been some exciting developments in the UFO world in the past few days in Milan, and a remarkable sighting. We have Paola Harris on the line from Italy. Paola started her work in the UFO field by working for J. Allen Hynek, no less, and has been a reporter and journalist in this field ever since. She has a great website, paolaharris.it for Italy. Paola is in Italy. That's paolaharris.it. She has a book out on her website, which is available from the unknowncountry.com store and also through Amazon, Connecting the Dots. It is interviews with the top people in the field, an exploration of just what it's all about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Also, later, we're going to be talking about Paola's work with Charles Hall. As you know, Charles Hall has been of great interest to everyone on Dreamland because we have interviewed him, and we recently had that remarkable subscriber interview with Gwyneth Mackay from Australia, who, without knowing anything about Charles Hall, turned out to have been involved for years with what seemed to be the same being. So very exciting stuff ahead. Now, Paola, let's start with a sort of an overview of what's going on in Europe, because I know there's been a flotilla over Spain, like appeared over Mexico, and now what I consider possibly, and you also have said, one of the potentially very important event, 6 hours of UFOs hanging over Milan.
Yeah, this is a really big story in that we haven't had a sighting like this in a long time, and it was on Saturday night, which was the 6th of of February, and it was from 11 o'clock at night until 5 in the morning, and first they were 5 points of light, and then they came closer, and they were in a horizontal position. And what happened is that the people in that area called the police right away. They called the fire department. They called the airport, which was the closest. It's Linate Airport, to ask what was happening because they'd never seen a phenomenon like this. Now, those 5 lights change colors and shapes. So they were 5 lights in a horizontal position changing colors and shapes. And the irony is that the press and the media covers this a lot more openly in Europe, Whitley. The press came, and the pictures that I sent you of these lights and the changing shapes were taken by a kind of the on-site photographer. He's like our Associated Press. About 20 UFOs went over Madrid, and that has been reported on Frank Warren's site. Frank Warren has a blogspot site, and there's a photograph of that from this year that look very much like the flotillas of Mexico. They're not birds. They definitely are not balloons. They move in a formation, an intelligent formation. And if we're having these sightings over these major cities, Whitley, you had mentioned you thought that this was kind of a cosmic message, and I believe it is too.
Oh, I think it is, absolutely. And just, folks, for your information, Jaime Maussan's website is ovnis.tv. That's OVNIS.tv. And Frank Harris's website is
Frank Warren.
Excuse me. His website is http://frankwarren.blogspot.com. And there you will find a photograph of the very lovely Paola Harris, as well as more description of what's going on in Italy. Now let's go on to this, the significance, because these things in the past when there have been extraordinary UFO events, they have had a significance, Paola. Could you tell us a little bit about what your studies indicate that significance might be?
Well, for the most part, UFO sightings are usually over either military or nuclear bases, where there's where there are nuclear missiles or there are nuclear devices. I mean, they're not just in the middle of nowhere for no reason. So I feel that, first of all, if you try to correlate some of the world events that are happening right now, we have a tremendous amount of tension here in Europe. And I live in Rome, so I know I live with it every day. We have a lot of tension. We have a lot of religious tension. A researcher like me, Whitley, is trying to figure it out because it reminds me a lot of the Phoenix Lights. And I'm doing some stories on the Phoenix Lights and have some original film footage from this summer. And those things appear over South Mountain also. And in the same case over here near Sky Harbor Airport. And it's like the same thing. It's like nobody knows what to do. Everybody's looking at them. They're almost tired of photographing them, and they're just there. So I'm, as a researcher, trying to figure out what that means. I mean, they're just there, and they're there for a long period of time. And you had mentioned the flotilla in Spain. That was in Madrid.
Just a minute, Paola. For our listeners' sake, but let's just talk a little bit about flotillas in general first, and
right.
Sort of set this up. Tell us a little bit about the flotillas that first appeared in Mexico and what they looked like.
Okay, now I'm very close to Jaime Maussan, who's the journalist that really disseminates this information the best. He has the best film footage ever. So for your listeners, if they go on Jaime Maussan's website, just Mexican flotillas, they'll see them. They look like, in the case of Mexico City, we're dealing with 200 white circles. They're just white circles. They look like balloons, but they move in a formation. They move all together, and there's usually one that is pulsating and brighter than the others. And over Milano, there was also one that was brighter than the others. It wasn't pulsating. It was brighter than the others. And the flotillas of Mexico City is an ongoing phenomenon. Jaime has film footage from 2004, usually January, February, and March of 2004 over Mexico City. And film footage is incredible. So there's something going on in Mexico City. And so this year, on January 5th, a flotilla as photographer. So here is the press photographing UFOs. They're not calling them that. They're just calling them unusual lights. Here is the airport saying that they're not on the radar, so they're not going to scramble anything that's not on the radar. They're not going to scramble any jets. And here are a set of lights everybody's watching for a long period of time. It was an incredible phenomenon reported by 3 newspapers and 2 television channels.
That statement, not on the radar, is important because, of course, the debunkers were saying they were weather balloons. Weather balloons are coded so that they will show up on radar.
Yeah, the debunkers are saying they're weather balloons, but they don't change shapes, and also weather balloons have to be lit from the sun or some light source in order to reflect. I mean, everybody knows they don't reflect at night.
These weren't reflecting dully. They were actually shining, weren't they?
They were shining and moving and changing colors. In fact, the testimony that we have, and we'll have his word-for-word testimony next week, talks about, this particular young man talks about they're changing color from red to green to orange. And I don't think weather balloons do that.
No, they're not lately. We have that set of photographs that you sent us up on our website. So, folks, if you go to unknowncountry.com, just look in the. I guess it'll probably be archived now. Or it may be up on the main page. I don't know, but you can look at the story we ran about this, and we ran it immediately because I felt it was a very important sighting. Paola, can you tell us? Has there been anything further? Is this sort of it?
No, because all the agencies, everybody is curious. And we're sure somebody did some video footage. I mean, it was there long enough. We want to get the video footage. So a lot of the investigators are going to Milan to see if we can find video footage of this phenomenon